The version of you that survived deserves compassion, not analysis, not dismantling, not the kind of relentless self-examination that treats everything you became as a problem to be solved. Compassion, because surviving is not a small thing, and the version of you that learned how to do it, that learned which parts to show, which parts to keep quiet, which strategies kept you safe, in rooms that didn't always have space for all of you, that version was doing something real. But it was never the whole story. And this is about what gets missed when survival becomes the only chapter you allow yourself to live in. There is a particular kind of person who has become very good at a very specific thing. Not success necessarily, not happiness, not even healing. Getting through. The kind of person who has developed, over years, a set of strategies so effective at managing difficulty that the strategies themselves have become invisible, not something they do, something they are. And from the outside, this person often looks remarkably capable, steady, reliable, like someone who has figured something out that most people haven't. But from the inside, there is often a quiet awareness that the capability has come at a cost, that the getting through has required a kind of constant management that leaves very little room for anything else. Before anything else, the version of you that survived needs to be understood on its own terms. It formed for reasons, real reasons. Rooms that were genuinely too small for the full version of you. Relationships that functioned better when you made yourself easier. Experiences that taught you, through repetition, that certain parts of yourself were safer left unexpressed. And in response to those rooms, those relationships, those experiences, you built something, a version of yourself that could navigate all of it, that knew how to read a room before entering it, that knew which opinions to keep to yourself, that knew how to absorb difficulty without showing it, that knew how to keep going when keeping going was the only available option. That version saved you in ways you may not fully appreciate. It kept relationships intact. It kept you functional in environments that would have been harder to survive otherwise. It got you here. And here is not nothing. But here is what is also true. A version of yourself built for specific circumstances will eventually meet circumstances it was not built for. Safer rooms. People who genuinely want the full version of you. Relationships with actual space for your real opinions, your real needs, your real reactions to what is happening around you. And in those rooms, the survival version can become a limitation. Not because it was wrong, but because it was built for a different environment. Like wearing armor into a room where the war is over. The armor made sense once. It may have been necessary. But it also makes it harder to feel the warmth that is now actually available. And this is where survival becomes a ceiling rather than a floor, where the strategies that once protected you begin to prevent you from accessing what is now possible. The cost of staying entirely in survival mode is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, in the connections that never quite reach depth. Because the survival version keeps a careful distance from full vulnerability, in the opportunities never fully pursued. Because the survival version has learned to expect a certain level of disappointment and calibrates ambition accordingly. In the moments of genuine joy that arrive slightly muted. Because the survival version has learned to hold good things at a slight remove, prepared for their ending before it comes. And in the persistent sense, quiet, hard to name, easy to dismiss, that something is missing. Not something external, something internal, a fullness that the survival version, by its very design, was never quite able to provide. Here is the distinction that matters most. The survival version of you is not your enemy. It is not something to be fought against, shamed, or urgently dismantled. It is a part of you. A real part, one that formed in response to real circumstances, and that carries real wisdom about how to navigate difficulty. But it is not all of you. Underneath the survival version, underneath the strategies, the roles, the careful management of how much of yourself you allow into any given room, there is something older, something that existed before the first adjustment was ever made. Not a perfect self, not an uncomplicated self, just the version of you that hadn't yet learned it needed to be anything other than what it was. That version is still there, not as something to return to exactly, but as something to remember, as evidence that before the survival strategies formed, you existed, fully, without apology. When you can hold both versions at once, the one you were and the one you became, something shifts. You stop treating the survival version as your permanent identity, and you stop treating the original version as something lost forever. Instead, you begin to see the full picture, a person who started somewhere real, who encountered circumstances that required adaptation, who adapted intelligently, effectively, sometimes at great cost, and who is now, perhaps for the first time, in a position to ask, which parts of the adaptation are still serving me, and which parts have simply become habit? That question is not a crisis. It is the beginning of something. If you have spent years living entirely inside the version of yourself that learned how to survive, I want you to know that version deserved to exist. It did what it needed to do. It got you through things that needed getting through. But you are allowed to outgrow it, not to abandon it, not to be ashamed of it. Just to recognize that it was one chapter, and that chapters are not the whole book. The whole book includes the version of you that existed before the survival began, and the version of you that might exist after the survival is no longer the only thing required of you. You are more than what you learned to be in your hardest moments. You always were.